Sitting up with the dead was a common practice among the good Methodists of Palmyra, Tennessee, my grandmother would say, to begin the story of her mother's death. On the evening of my grandmother's death, her body, which had once been animated, once filled with life, lay alone in an empty and unfamiliar room. Across town, I could think only of my want to sit with her.
There is a time for love and laughter. The days will pass like summer storms. The winter wind will follow after. But there is love.
Say it's only a paper moon sailing over a cardboard sea, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Yes, it's only a canvas sky hanging over a muslin tree, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. For without your love, why, it's a honky-tonk parade. And without your love, it's a melody played in a penny arcade. It's a Barnum and Bailey world, just as phony as it can be. But it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me.
Sing me a song.
No, darling, I can't. My voice won't. I don't have a voice anymore.
Come, sweetheart, tell me now is the time. You tell me your dream, and I'll tell you mine.
Great Aunt Ida Steele died on the farm in the fall that year. On the evening of her death, her body was laid in wake in the parlor of her house. Most of our family were sharecroppers, but Aunt Ida, having come into money somewhere down the line, was rich, and her house proved it, filled to the brim with the family's antiques. On the evening of Aunt Ida's death, the parlor was lined with folding chairs. Her casket, which was pushed against the back wall, stood open. Lace covered her face. The family sat up with Aunt Ida in shifts, and at midnight the neighbors came with food. Relieved from their quiet mourning, the family rose from their seats, chucked up the fire, and gathered in the dining room to eat. They ate and laughed and told their stories, but suddenly the room fell silent, and then they heard the sound of crackling. Rushing into the parlor, they found the entire room engulfed in flames, and there, in the middle of it all, lay Aunt Ida. The family got excited, the neighbors got excited, and everyone began to prepare Aunt Ida to be wheeled out of the house in her casket. On the evening of Aunt Ida's death, the family held a wake, and on the front lawn, the neighbors and family gathered around Aunt Ida's casket as they watched the house and all of the family's finest things burn to the ground. Growing up in the hills of Clarksville, Tennessee, clogging was a part of my grandmother's white Southern identity. So when a dance school in our hometown started offering classes, she encouraged my sisters and me to take lessons. Clogging is a percussive American folk dance created from the blending of several newly integrated cultures. Clogging combines the jig brought to Appalachia by English, Irish, and German immigrants, buck dancing introduced to the American South by enslaved Africans, and the Cherokee stomp introduced by Native Americans who, escaping the Trail of Tears, hid in the hills of Appalachia. In Unison continues my generative research and collaboration with Flat Granny, a life-size photographic costume of my deceased grandmother, this time worn on my back. In Unison was a series of 6 pop-up performances that conjoined my body with my late grandmother's photographic body in a topsy-turvy doll of sorts. Combining photography, costume design, storytelling, and live performance, In Unison explores questions of ownership, cultural appropriation, and the power of storytelling.
The knocking sounds were just hollow thuds at first. Maeve thought they could be coming from the old pipework running under the bar, or perhaps caused by one of ill-tempered Cody's outbursts back in the kitchen, throwing produce to the floor or banging his rolling pin off the countertop. The knocks led her down to the stone-lined storage cellar beneath the Green Eye Tavern, which itself lays beneath Elster's Old Chapel Inn. The ever-evolving structure was built upon the original chapel's foundation, laid by the Jesuit priests from New France when the town was first settled. In the cellar, Maeve heard the knocks continue. The room was vacant, lined only with shelves of canned food and some stray folding chairs. The noise, discreet bangs and pops at first, began to coalesce into harsher sounds, coughing, perhaps, coming from even farther down, somewhere beneath the cellar. Placing her head to the floorboards to get a better read, Maeve felt a slight damp breeze against her cheek, along with the scent of molded wood. She had been hearing these sounds for the past few months. They started soon after she began keeping the books for the old tavern along the lake, the only job she was able to find in the area, and the only job that allowed her to spend most of her daylight hours with her young daughter, Claire. With her knees to the floorboards, Maeve could hear something new. The knocks were still there, off in the distance, but now she could make out the rush of a current. The coughing sounds built up once again, forming into fits of speech, odd, frantic words in a garbled voice. Every so often she thought she could pick out a word or phrase in German, only for it to switch to another tongue, something like broken French. She thought about running, desperately wanted to head back upstairs, race through the darkened tavern, cross back through the inn up to her room and gather up Claire, who would be sleeping by now to the sounds of television. They could get back in the truck and leave again. But instead, Maeve stayed there in that position, frozen to the ground on her knees for nearly half an hour. Has it come to this? She asked herself, hearing voices like some Joan of Arc down in the cellar. Yet she did hear something coming from below the boards. With a few tools left leaning against the wall, including an iron fire poker, she wedged up a couple boards beneath her. The sodden wood pulled apart with some pressure from the fire poker. Maeve hit an artery. Under the floorboards, a stream ran under the inn, etching its way through the limestone cavern to the lake. She tore back the remaining sections of boards, opening a stoma to the current. The voice picked up again now. The sounds came back like the clearing of a throat. Amazed, the voice came through to Maeve in English, simultaneously close to her ear and issuing from somewhere below, introducing itself as Aileen, an original inhabitant of the Lake Elster settlement, daughter of Henry Babur and Greta Freck, the French fur trappers who had founded the town. After that manic burst of speech, it went quiet. Maeve saw only the rushing stream below as the voice faded back into the reverberations of moving water, a figure just out of sight. Maeve cautiously returned 2 nights later, having told no one what she had heard in the cellar. Her shift was over for the night. The doors were locked, guests cleared out, and Claire was upstairs in bed. She was carrying a plate of food with her from earlier in the day, leftovers wrapped up in tinfoil for her daughter. The voice returned when she pulled back the rug, uncovering the hole in the floor. This time it was more urgent, interrupting itself to get out its message. Aileen Babur, born a mute into a bilingual family, the first European born on the lake. Her voice carried on in English, speaking rapidly as Maeve listened a few feet above the current. She had run off with the local Abenaki people, leaving her family and settlement behind. She had taken in with a young Indian man. Before long, she was pulled from her new family, forcibly removed from the tribe by the trappers and priests who had founded Lake Elster. She lashed out at her rescuers, biting at the throat of one of the clergymen in a frenzy. She was stoned as punishment, stripped bare, beaten, and dropped into the water tied to a column of stone. At these words, Maeve darted back from the opening in the floor. She tripped over the plate of food she brought with her, struggling to find her footing, and grasped for the cellar door. Maeve, the voice spoke, addressing her directly now for the first time. What happened before? What happened to your husband? Her husband, Nathan Gladding, ear, nose, and throat specialist, had been drunk. He came after her again. She got between him and young Claire, just a few years old at the time. He had never wanted a child and took his anger out at her. Nathan had his wife backed into a corner. Maeve raised her hand in self-defense and grabbed out with the other for whatever she could find. Her father's old pair of sewing shears left on the side table and thrust them forward. As soon as he hit the ground, the room erupted into flame. She was never sure what started it that evening. There had been a fire burning in the fireplace earlier, and her husband had a habit of smoking, but she'd never seen a room ignite like that before. She staggered around the house in shock, scissors still in hand. Claire crawled across the kitchen floor and was lying next to the old dog bowls when she scooped her up. Quickly, she ran her daughter out to the truck and buckled her into the seat. With Claire in the truck, Maeve went back into the flames, maybe to check on her husband, or perhaps to retrieve her father's urn off the mantel. The smoke enveloped her inside the living room, and she fell, hitting her head hard on the banister. She awoke alone in the hospital with a long scar singed into her left arm and down onto her rib cage, an indelible mark from that chapter. 2 years later now, the smell of wood smoke still clung to her hair, impossible to wash away. Iron Maeve forged in flames. Haleen's voice came back mockingly. Maeve slammed the cellar door and ran up to the inn to find Wade. He'd still be here now, the unwelcome memory and taunting voice blistering in her mind. Wade Lagarde had taken a room at the old chapel inn. He was often down at the bar and had exchanged a few kind words with Maeve. He spent most of his time moving boxes of files into his room where he was setting up a new office. He had been laughed out of his old position at the Lake Elster Historical Society by the current leadership. He was seen as a folklorist, not a true historian, and an outsider, having come to the lake later in life. Wade's knack for storytelling and his perspective on the history of Elster didn't align with the official founding story of the lake. His advanced age made him a target for ridicule. Now in his 90s, Wade was setting up his own organization, the Real Historical Society of Lake Elster, based out of the inn. Wade knew about Haleen Mabor. Some years earlier, he and Marcy L. Brox, the former director of the original Historical Society, had found a written account down near the caverns. They believed it was written by Greta, Haleen's mother, and hidden down there for years. It was stuffed in an old leather shoe and buried under a pile of rocks. This revelation came as a shock to the rest of the society. It was written off as a forgery, most likely drafted by Wade himself. They were surprised that Marcy would believe in it too. The story that had been told already had a neat ending. The clergy existed harmoniously with the others in the lake, both Abenaki and European. Wade wasn't completely surprised when Maeve banged on his door in the middle of the night. He had fallen asleep after reading, needed to head back home, but he could sense earlier in the day that she had something to share with him. He had heard stories about Haleen and her appearances from others around town. It was after 10 p.m. His knees were aching, and he was still half asleep. Yet he decided to follow Maeve back through the inn and tavern, down the cellar steps to hear for himself.